Good morning, everybody. I'll wait as well. Thank you, Senator Pike.
All right. Let's head around the room.
Tony Close, United States Sheriff's and Deputy Association. We are registered undecided on this bill. I think if it moves forward as is, we would probably move to oppose. And I think what we would like to see is a more targeted approach on certain types of felonies. But to lead this to any felony conviction, you're going to lose your retention benefit. It's really broad and really punitive for folks that have put themselves into a law enforcement career and taking things seriously. When you include any felonies, you think about, I think it's a class B theft. Shake your head if I'm wrong, but you're talking about $1,500 and above. You find yourself in a divorce, in a dispute over a TV, right? And I think it's my TV. She thinks it's hers. Now I've been charged with theft, right? Not only am I charged with theft on that TV, I've lost my retirement benefit. So that's where our folks, I think, are asking questions about, could this be more tailored to, forcible felonies, sexual assaults? Could it be more tailored to crimes against the state? If you've been defrauding your agency, stealing from the state, those kinds of things would be something that would be more palatable. But just any felony, it's kind of hard to digest.
Ed Taylor, State Treasurer's Office. We're undecided, monitoring, and just understand there might be some effort to narrow the scope, and stuff like as there has been in many states. Monitoring, we think that would be a good idea.
Jeff Smith, Iowa State Police Association. We're undecided as of now. I can hear Tony's comments that I think if it goes forward in this case, if our board makes that decision, that we would probably lean that direction as well as to oppose. Right now, we're quite honestly just learning and trying to find out what the long-term ramifications are.
Peter Herr with the Iowa Federation of Labor. We're opposed. I kind of understand what you're getting at, but we feel that retirement is kind of an extension of wages earned for the time you worked, and really wouldn't probably be going back and taking wages that we took from people outside of what the courts typically do, for restitution and things like that. But also, it could be treating people differently for the same crime. Like if we committed the same crime, and it was I have 5,000 in my account, he has 300,000, and be the same. You take really all everything for both. I don't know. It's just kind of a lot of questions that came up on it.
Melissa Speed, Aspen Council 61. We were registered opposed to the bill. There are a lot of things my brother said, but as well that this isn't going to help in tracking and obtaining employees either. If they feel that down the road there could be double jeopardy, and that is kind of what this is. If we feel the courts already have mechanisms in place to handle this for restitution. Thank you.
Melissa Peterson, the Iowa State Education Association. We're registered as undecided on the bill, but leaning in opposition for many of the same reasons that have already been articulated. We do understand, for example, wage garnishment or benefit garnishment. If there's an alimony situation, let's say child care, or that kind of a situation, or if there are punitive damages that have been assessed if someone has been convicted of a felony. But in terms of just an outright kind of clawback or benefits earned, I don't know what the logistical mechanism would be for that. And then it also gets into what happens if a conviction is overturned. What would the IPER system do then? It just raises a lot of questions, and we also feel that this is about a benefit that has been earned over a period of time and have lots of questions. So if this bill does move forward, we would like to see it narrowed. We would like it to be specific to the position the person was in related to public service, but think that this raises lots of red flags, not only for why, but also the mechanism of how we would go about doing it.
Kelly Paschke on behalf of the Iowa Peace Officers Association. We're registered as neutral, but share many of the concerns that my friends around the room have already stated. I'll add, a few clarifications that we would bring to your attention. First, what happens if there's a deferred judgment? So somebody's convicted, but they get a deferred judgment, and that conviction goes away. The bill doesn't really say how that would be treated. Second, in law enforcement, it's not uncommon for law enforcement officers to switch jobs and pension systems. So would a law enforcement officer this bill applies to lose all their pensions, or just the pension that's related to the crime where they were convicted, or all prior pensions? And then the third thing is, we think, while we agree that if somebody commits a crime, certainly they should be punished, we think the ability of the employer or the state or the public entity to claw back the money that may be owed can be handled through a restitution order for criminal conviction.
Good morning, Jake Frederickson with Isle Professional Firefighters. We're registered undecided. Share the broad concerns of the group. Even if the bill is narrowed to something specific to the job, there are also could be some concerns with that. I have Joe Van Honche with the Des Moines Fire Department to outline some real life instances in which a firefighter could lose their pension just by doing their job.
Yeah, we take on a great deal of liability. Sorry, Joe Van Hollen, Des Moines Professional Firefighters, Iowa Professional Firefighters. In our jobs, specifically in EMS, we take on a great deal of liability when we're working under those parameters. And it doesn't take much for someone to file a complaint, do whatever. And because we work as a group, that complaint might be against one person, but can be very broad in who it impacts in the group. As a captain on the Des Moines Fire Department, I supervise 8 to 12 people at a time, and maybe in the back of an ambulance working on someone. If one of those goes bad, it's typically the blame kind of lays on everybody. I do feel like it's very broad. We also are currently undecided on it, but I'd like to see some narrowing of that. Also, I'll mention, we want to hold our members accountable, and that is important to us. So we can see some need for this, but not at the broad level that it is right now. Thank you.
Megan Schleski with Ivers, and we are obviously undecided on the bill, but hope to be part of future conversations with the mechanics and how it's administered.
Argue Schwarm on behalf of the Municipal Fire and Police Department of Iowa. We're just monitoring the bill. We're currently not included, but if there are changes to which we are added, we just want to make sure that the language is drafted in a way that doesn't make it difficult to administer. And then I would also just add that we currently have in our code where we address folks that have maybe convicted of a felony that's job related, and then the benefits go to the spouse or family or children.
Looks like we have at least one person online. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Andrew Rittman.
Yes, my name's Andrew Ritland. I'm the Mahaska County Attorney. I've been listening to the other comments, and I believe I'm the only person who actually does criminal prosecution, collections, and forfeitures, which this bill obviously touches on. I do share, however, many of the same concerns. The scope of this bill would allow forfeiture for any felony offense. And I think you got to remember that the most common felony that an Iowan is convicted of is operating while intoxicated, third or subsequent offense. So what could happen under this bill is that a public employee gets his third OWI conviction and now loses his retirement benefits because he was drunk driving. That is a substantial consequence, more than the underlying criminal conviction would even have. So my concerns are on the scope of the crime this would apply to. From my perspective, it would make more sense if the crimes were focused on the occupation which they hold and the crime which they commit. So, for example, if someone commits felonious misconduct in office, so they're using their position as a public employee to further some sort of crime, to me, there's more of a substantial connection between the crime and the forfeiture of retirement benefits. So I think that should be looked at. Also, the scope of the forfeiture, I think, really should be addressed as well. So I have done multiple forfeitures under 809A, which is the mechanism under this bill where this money would be taken away. For 809A, the Civil Forfeiture Reform Act, the property that's being forfeited is always connected to the underlying crime in some way. Either it's a proceed of a crime, the money they gained from committing the crime, an instrumentality of the crime. So it was like buy money for drugs, something like that. Or it's connected somehow into the commission of the crime. This, however, would be a totally separate forfeiture unrelated to the underlying crime itself, which is a little bit incongruent with how we've always done civil forfeitures, at least on the criminal side here in Iowa. I think if you wanted to make a more tailored or targeted approach, in my view, the bill should target the restitution, either category A or category B restitution, and victim restitution for those categories of debts that are incurred because of the crime itself. For that amount, that should be able to be forfeited. Right now, under 97B 39, the chapter for IPERs, I, as a county attorney, cannot institute garnishments or collections on IPER benefits for any criminal case. So if, I'll just give you one example here. Here in my jurisdiction, about 10 years ago, an individual working with the water district stole approximately $300,000 of taxpayers' money. Now, she is still in collection below these 10 years later, right? And she will get IPER benefits when she reaches retirement age. But I am not able to garnish the IPER benefits because of 97B 39. So if you wanted to address the situation, to have a consequence for public employees and the retirement benefits, to me, it would make more sense to allow garnishments by the state of those IPER benefits. And whether you want to do a garnishment or forfeiture, I guess it is neither here nor there. There's different ways to do it. But I think that would be a more substantial connection between the underlying felonious conduct, the crime in which they've been committed, and the forfeiture of the assets. I think you really start getting into very tricky grounds when a person who has 100,000 IPER benefits and a person who has $1 million in IPER benefits, for both individuals, both get the same penalty, regardless of the underlying crime. I think that's a little bit difficult from a kind of equity standpoint. So from my position as a county attorney, I think tailoring the scope and tailoring the scope of the forfeiture would make the most sense if the committee wants to proceed something on these grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Just raise your hand online if you'd like to speak. Seeing none. Before we close, there is, and I should have brought this up to start with, there's an amendment on the bill. As currently written, the bill would apply to public employees convicted of a felony. However, the amendment specifies the crime must be related to the public employment. Rhode Island statute says any crime related to his or her public office or public employment. So anything related to the office specifically or employment. Do we have any closing comments? Senator Townsend.
Oh, I have lots of questions and comments. First off, I have concerns. I appreciate that the scope being narrowed, because that was something that definitely was one thing I was concerned about, knowing many people that have gotten a couple of DUIs. And, I was wondering, does that increase litigation then? If, you get pulled over again, does that mean you're going to fight it as hard as you can because you don't want to lose your pension? Obviously, that would happen. I also have concerns on the inequity of, however long you've worked here, or however much is in your IPERs, it's the same penalty regardless of what you have in your IPERs. You're losing all of it. I also have questions on what happens to your spouse's benefits and that kind of thing if you get a felony. And, I know it's got something in here about, and I didn't have a chance to go through all the details, but it's got something in there about if you're, if you have a divorce decree or whatever, then your spouse is entitled to her piece. But what if you're still happily married? Is she still entitled to it? And, I don't know. I just have tons of questions, so I will not be supporting the bill. Also, I also would like to add, I know it says in there somewhere where the money goes, but I don't think it goes back to IPERS, so I was kind of curious about that also.
Well, we all know why we're here in regards to this bill, because obviously there's been a lot of gray areas and some things like that. But I do agree we got to narrow the scope. Glad to see the amendment. I think discussions can further, but I think we need to dial it way back and look at some of these felonies, classify things like that. Scope narrowed. Lots of questions I'm sure are going to arise as we continue this conversation, but to keep the conversation going, I'm happy to sign it out knowing that there's going to be a lot of work, scope narrowing, and discussions to be held.
I agree with that. This same legislation is enacted in about 40 states, including many blue states. I do think there are concerns with potential equity, whether you've been just vested in a pension versus maybe been in for 20 years. I think a lot of addressing as far as wage garnishments, alimony, child support, those are all being performed now while being gainfully employed, and those can be handled also through this system without those monies being forfeited. So I think we do need to have more conversation, but I would like to move this bill forward. Meeting adjourned.